Hello, it's Joyful Hermit. I'm getting ready to have to get into bed this afternoon. I'm having quite a bit of pain today. Um, Maybe I'll talk about how that process works too sometime. But I've prayed more and more. I've been able to practice the harp and listened a little bit to a video clip of Padre Pio speaking in Italian and Latin. Padre Pio died in 1968, September 23rd. He was a mystic, a stigmatic, suffered a great deal, priest in Italy, and I really like him. I consider him a good friend, and I've learned much from the books I've read about his life and also things that all his letters that he wrote to spiritual daughters just in the very beginning of his priesthood. Um, he suffered a great deal as far as being shut down and cut off by his superiors from doing things. After a certain point, a couple of years, he was never allowed to correspond again. And all of that was for good reason. God had something else for him, something more, and God knew that he would get so much correspondence, there would be no way that Padre Pio could respond to all of it, even though much of what Padre Pio did in his life was very mystical and very miraculous. Um, I wrote a poem. Also, I don't know if I was very good in explaining how my spiritual director yesterday had pretty much left it to me. And he also was very touched by the ceremony that I had of my consecration as a hermit over 11 years ago on a snowy, dark night, December 29th of 2000. He asked, "Oh, were there witnesses?" And I said, "Not at first." It was in a convent chapel, an old chapel that was unused, little used ever in recent years, beautiful. And the old priest had brought out a kneeler to the altar. He gave me a lovely pillar candle that I still have. He had prepared a homily. We did not have a mass, but we had a 20 to 30 minute ceremony based on an old anchoritic rule from the Middle Ages, lots of Psalms and New Testament readings. I repeated my vows. He received them. He gave his prepared homily and remarks. I was incensed. And yes, there was two witnesses, a man and his little 1-year-old boy, who came out on that snowy night, and in fact was totally unexpected that he would be there. But for whatever reason, his real presence desired him there, and that was the one witness. So, and the little 1-year-old, who's now, I think, 11 years old or 10 years old now, and live in another state now. Anyway, and I think it's wonderful when people have things that they're excited about and celebrate, like people when they get married, the brides, "I'm married now, I'm married," or rejoicing like that. But I'm also reminding all of us that we are basically nothing. And when it comes to within Christianity, and we see the history, and we see Jesus and all of those in his time period, there was a lot more simplicity. And increasingly now, today, I will be able to report to my spiritual director, because he said, ask the Lord what he really, really wants for you. Because he was willing for me to go the canonical route. And yet, I think as I mentioned it, as I returned to my car yesterday, already these feelings were coming upon me. Why would I do this? Why would I jeopardize in any way the special that already is. I would never want any other service or ceremony. What I had was so very special. My spiritual director said it was so very, very special and meaningful. And nothing should ever replace it. And nothing ever will this side of heaven. I know that now. I wrote this poem a couple or more years ago because we had some priests become monsignors. And there was a lovely service and a reception following, a very lovely reception. And I was intrigued with these little cords in carnadine, which is the color of sort of a pinkish blood, magenta blood red. And there were these little cords that came from their beautiful cassocks that looped down around these incarnadine sashes. And I asked Reverend Monsignor, oh, what are these little cords for? What do they mean? And he says, they're just decoration or something, you know. And I thought, no, everything has meaning, everything. And I thought about strings attached, strings attached. And of course, when we hear that, oh, there's strings attached, it often seems negative, And sometimes it is. Sometimes it is not so good in one sense, but yet very good and necessary in another. And in this poem, I give examples. For example, my harp. If the strings weren't attached, there would not be tension to create music when the strings are plucked. If a child lost hold of the string to his or her kite, the fun of flying the kite would be over. The kite would be off in the sky or crash down to earth. There would be no more tension. Of course, if prisoners' strings, ropes that shackled them from the waist to the ankles, if those were unbound, we would have prisoners loose, and that could be good or not so good, depending on if the prisoner was justifiably being imprisoned. St. John of the Cross spoke once of a little bird, and he said, even if the smallest of birds has the tiniest thread tied to his foot, his claw, that bird cannot fly. So John of the Cross was speaking of attachments and in the spiritual life, we must be freed and not tied so that we can be created and lifted off into the spiritual knowledge in which God is beckoning us with no strings attached. However, anyway, this is strings attached. Temple priest, times past, ties line to ankle, tinkling bell. If dragged from Holy of Holies, swooned, God's glory. Yes, in the Old Testament, the priests would have a rope tied to their ankles with a bell on it so that if something happened to them in the Holy of Holies, those outside could pull that priest out to safety, in case the priest swooned or in case something happened in the mysterium tremendum before God who lives in the Holy of Holies. Prisoner, hamstrung, rope-wrapped waist, knotted, hobbled feet. Embryo, umbilical cord, unity bond, mother, severed at birth. In fact, we say, when children get to a certain age, to adulthood, cut the apron strings. But when we're babies in the womb, that umbilical cord is necessary for life. Kite, tail bobbed, twine taut, airborne battle, wind-bound and mortal grip, earth real safe or crash, or sky loosed, limited free. Harp strings strung, soundboard to bridge, plucked tension, sings. Cassock sash incarnadine, secured at waist, placed satin piping loops. Temporal ties, protect, contain, control, produce, maintain. Mystical strands thread soul, love inviolable. Not mine, O Lord, thine will beweave me thee. Jesus, born God, strings attached, detached at birth for human worth. Cleaved next, his time had come, cut down, set free from earth, man's only binding hope. Yes, dear friends, in Christ Jesus, those who are attached through various ties, good, in this realm, thank you for your prayers. And those who are unattached, and yet tied with the mystic strands in which our souls are threaded and woven in Christ in ways that we don't even understand, perceive, feel, or know about. That's my destiny, and I'm going to be so pleased to shortly tell my spiritual director to stop praying, to stop. We'll take this off the table, this canonical approval stuff. I must fly with the thread off my little bird ankle, and come what may. I'm going to go the old-fashioned way of hermit life, and yet what is good for others I realize is not my concern. And I am going to be obedient to my spiritual father, though, and stay very clear of those who are saying certain things have to be certain ways, or are wrought up in what my spiritual director said are the legalisms. It's not for me. Maybe for you. Nothing wrong with it, I guess. I don't know. It's not right for me. Now, off to bed with Venerable Lieberman. It's amazing the different saints that end up in bed in the books. I read a few chapters and try to rest and get the pain more under control. On days like this, no amount of pain medications on earth will stave off the total body suffering. But I have offered this. I offered during the night for a couple of situations, and for 2 people who are suffering, I offered to please let me have some of that pain so that they could be healed and better carry on their work, because their work is very much involved in the temporal and very necessary. So remember, strings attached can be very, very good, but sometimes they're not right for us, and they can then, in those cases, be very limiting. God bless His real presence in you, and may you snip today whatever strings His real presence desires not for you, but may you stay within the discipline and the good and the laws of God Himself, and in obedience to Holy Mother Church. Thank you.